Hello, magical experimenters. Taylor Ellwood here, and welcome to our latest video live stream. So tonight, I'm going to discuss the topic of why money magic won't solve your financial problems. And this came about because I had asked in the Magical Experiments Facebook group what questions people had about magic, and one question a person had was, he said the following is, one thing that I'd like to understand better is why so many magicians, sorcerers struggle with money prosperity matters if there's a lot of magical books, courses around this specific question. He talked about how he'd been listening to a podcast about money and magic, and the conclusion that they had was that people have bad relationships with money and prosperity in general. And so when they make magic rituals to obtain money and prosperity, the results are weak because the people are not able to receive what they want. Interesting perspective. And I kind of agree with it. And I kind of don't. So I'm going to talk tonight about about my own perspective on money magic and why money magic doesn't solve your financial problems. And I share some of this in my book, Manifesting Wealth, which is available, and you can see a link to it in the video here. So, if you want more after this video, check that out. So I've always found that a lot of people have a problematic relationship with money, and they will sometimes go and they'll do some money magic to solve their problem, and then lo and behold, it doesn't work the way they hoped it would. And there's a good reason for that, because the fact of the matter is, most people really don't have a good relationship with money. They don't understand how money works. And if you don't understand how money works, then it is very hard to do anything with magic that's going to get you lasting results. And I say this as someone who's done a fair amount of wealth magic over the course of my life. And when I first started out doing it, I would say that I did it for very much as short-term reactive response, which is what I see most of money magic as. It's where somebody needs money for the moment. They need to solve a problem, and they do some magic to get things to work out. I mean, I did it, and one time, basically ended up manifesting a car out of it because I needed a car. I was a grad student, didn't have a car, and really needed one to be able to go on the road. And so, hey, great, it does work. I'm not going to say it doesn't work. But it was very much a short-term thing, because if you think about it, even like in relationship to getting money for a car, I mean, really, what are you getting? You're not investing that money. You're getting it into something that is going to depreciate over time in terms of the value that it has. And that's just the reality of any car that you own. And and really, I mean, this is actually a really good example of this, because if you look at car ownership, at least in the U.S., I'm not going to speak for the rest of the world, but I will speak on the basis of what I know about, in my own cultural and experience. Car ownership really exemplifies the very problem that we're talking about here in terms of money magic. And the reason why is this: most people will buy a car, and then once they get to the point where they're about to pay it off, they trade it in and they buy another car. And what do? They end up creating a cycle of debt that continually creates this experience that they're never really able to get out of, because they're always paying for something that they really don't necessarily need. If they took really good care of it, they would probably be just fine. But they're caught up in this continual loop of paying for something. And that's really the issue that I see in general when people approach money and magic. Now, I'm going to share a little bit about. I'm going to share some of my own path to financial literacy and some of the realizations I had along the way, and talk about how it changed my approach to wealth magic significantly. Because, as I said, when I started out, it was fair to say that I would do like money magic for the purposes of solving a problem, or like getting a short-term solution in place, because at the time I didn't have enough money or whatever else. And I never really fundamentally questioned why I didn't have enough money, or what my problem was in regards to money, because I didn't know any better. That changed when I did when I did a year long working with the element of earth. Like one of the things that I do is I do elemental balancing rituals, where it's a thing I came up with on my own, and the basis of it is that you balance, you create balance with the elements that you're out of balance with. And one year I ended up working with the element of earth, and the element of earth, working with it really changed my life significantly. This was back in, I think, like 2008 that I did it. It was the year that I ended up moving. Maybe it was 2007. Yeah, it was the year I ended up moving to Portland. Okay, so yeah, that was the year. But it was also the year that I ended up reading a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And I don't agree with everything that Robert Kiyosaki has to say in his stuff, but I will tell you one thing: if nothing else, reading that book really opened me up to the realities that I did not understand how magic worked. Because in that book, he talks about the fundamental attitude that people have toward money who don't have a lot of it versus people who are wealthy. And it really comes down to this: people who don't have a lot of money, don't understand money, are always working for it. They're always employees. They're always working for someone else to make money. They're exchanging time for money. People who understand how money works, who get it, they are looking at ways to make money work for them. They are finding ways to generate wealth from money, and they're not so much working for money as they're making the money they have work for them. Now, you can do that and be an employee. I mean, there are ways to do that. But I think that in general, most people that are out there in the world working at jobs don't typically look at it in that way. And the reality of it is because when you're working in a job, you're trying to earn enough money just to survive. And let's just be brutally honest here and admit that in the world over, it is not unless you work in a specific types of fields where there's lots of money. A lot of the jobs that are available are not great jobs. You're going to be working at jobs where you don't necessarily make a lot of money. And so it can be very hard to turn that around. And I say that with a full awareness of it because I've worked at those kinds of jobs. I mean, I started working when I was 14, and I can say that most of the jobs I've had in my life have not been great when it's come to making money. Even the job that I have right now isn't necessarily a huge income earner. You might say, well, geez, Taylor, you're talking about wealth magic and everything else. Like, how would you even know about that if you're working at a job? Well, I have been self-employed before. I was self-employed for 9 years and did okay with it. And I'm in the process of working my way toward my self-employment again because I'm busy doing that with all of my books. And I've got this plan in place that's generating very, very useful results, very lucrative results. So that's how I know. And I also know because I've taken the time to really learn about money and how money works. And so one of the things that I started doing is I read that one book, and then I started reading some other books on finances. And I did this because I realized that I really didn't understand how money worked. I didn't understand that. And because I didn't understand it, I was living in an environment where I never really had good control over my money because I didn't know how to properly value it or appraise it. I mean, as far as I was concerned, it was just something that I could use to get stuff. And that's where a lot of people really are. I can use money to get stuff. They don't think about, like, well, what else could you use money for? How else could you make money work for you? And so as I read these different books on finances, it started to change my approach to money, because then I started thinking about things like compound interest and how I could how I could start making money work for me. And I started thinking about money and movement, because the thing I realized is that money likes to move. Like, money doesn't like to be static as a spiritual force. And I do think of money as a spiritual force. Some people think the idea of money being a spiritual force is antithetical, and I disagree with that. That really comes right down again to their own issues with money. and their own challenges around money as opposed to anything else. I mean, unfortunately, the reality is that a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with money. They can't live with it, they can't live without it, and they see it as an evil thing, but that's not it at all. What they're focused on are the actions of other people and how those people have used money. What they don't realize is they have to square away their own relationship with money. So I see money as a spiritual force, and money likes to move. Money doesn't like to stay still. It doesn't want to. It's not going to. And if you understand that about money, then you can start to change your relationship with money, and spiritually as well as practically. And so for me, the way that I've approached my wealth magic, is that I started to fundamentally shift away from just thinking of it as money magic, and I started thinking of it from a holistic perspective. What do I really want to use this money for? One of the questions I began asking myself is, if I'm spending $1, what am I getting out of that dollar? After all, I'm exchanging time for that dollar. And that's literally the truth of it the world over. I don't care where you live in the world. If you are working for money, you are exchanging time for money. Well, here's the thing. You can't get that time back. That time is precious. It's priceless. You're putting a dollar amount on it, but that dollar amount doesn't even begin to reflect the true price of your time. So you have to really think carefully, like, what can you do to get a lot out of your money? And as a result, this is what caused me to stop spending money so much on things per se, and to start spending it on things that were much more important. I began looking at it in relationship to, for example, wealth, or example, health. How can I use money to help me with my health? Because there's this one saying, where you can spend all your life working for your wealth, and then you end up spending all your wealth on your health, right? You get older and you have to spend more money and take care of yourself. Well, there's ways to prevent that. And that really comes right down to understanding fundamentally that if you have money, it's not just about the being able to use it to acquire things. It's about using it holistically to examine your entire life and say, okay, what do I want to do with this money? How can I get the most value out of this money so that it actually helps me achieve what it is that I want to really do? And so I began to look at it in terms of my health. What could I do to take care of myself better health-wise? So for example, one of the things that I do now is I invest in a gym every month. I have a recurring subscription, and I go to that gym 5 days a week, every week. Why do I do that? Because I want to take good care of myself, and because I know that by exercising and doing things like that, I'm going to. I also invest my money in good food. I buy at the grocery store. I make a lot of my meals. I do eat out sometimes, but I really tend to value cooking my own food, and part of that is because I think it's ultimately healthier. And it's also part of it's for the experience. A huge part of how I approach wealth magic is based on experiences. If I'm going to exchange time for money, then I better get the most value I can out of that money. And so I always look at it in terms of how many experiences am I going to get out of this money? How am I going to fundamentally get more than my dollar's worth out of money? And this, again, is something most people don't think of. So let's put it this way. If you're going to buy a book, how many times are you going to read that book? And not only that, what are you going to do to really work with that book and get something out of that book? Because let's say you decide to buy Manifesting Wealth as an example, okay? My book. If you buy the paperback, it's $16.95. If you buy the ebook, I believe it's $7.95. That's what I have it priced as. So if you whether you're spending $7.95 or $16.95, how are you going to get at least double of that value out of that book? You could say, well, Taylor, I'll read it multiple times. Okay, fair enough. When you're reading it, you are giving some of your time over toward reading that book. I would tell you that the best value you could get out of it was actually working the book. Like literally not just reading the book, but actually taking everything in that book, or at least as much of it as you felt applied to you, and actively working it in your life in a way that helped you transform your life and helped you acquire what you want to get. That's how I approach every book I read. It's not just how many times I read it, it's what can I get out of each of these books? How does reading this book allow me to transform my life? I use another example. I love to play video games, okay? Now I know that I am exchanging time for video games as well as money. When I buy a game, on average, I'm planning on spending anywhere from between 10 hours to upwards of 100 hours of my life just playing that game. And that's just one time through. Now, some people would say, well, couldn't you do better things with your time? And I'd say, well, it's an experience. I like the experience of playing the game. I get into it. I genuinely enjoy it. For me, that matters. Like it's not just about the fact that I'm spending money to get a game. It's what I do with that game as a result. You know, how many times do I play it? How much enjoyment do I get out of it? When I look at money magic or wealth magic, I look at it in terms of fundamentally the joy you get out of your life. Now, all that said, the other thing that I really look at in regards to money is how can I how can I use it to generate even more money? How can I make money while I'm sleeping? So for me, because when you make money when you're sleeping, that's when you are really actively doing something right in terms of wealth. Because what you're doing at that point is you're making that money work for you. And look, I'm not saying this with the idea that you all want to be billionaires or anything like that. I mean, I don't care about being a millionaire or a billionaire. It may seem odd to say that, especially when I'm talking about how to make money work for you. But for me, it's not about being a millionaire or a billionaire. It's about making money work for you so that you can live your life the way you want to live. There are many people out there who live lives the way they want to live them, who aren't necessarily millionaires or billionaires. And that's fine. As long as they know what they want. They live within their means and they make their money work for them in whatever way they need to. The point isn't to go out there and become as rich as possible. The point is to have a relationship with money where you are getting more out of it than it is getting out of you. And you're not just exchanging your life for money, but you're actually getting something from it as a result. And this is what people fundamentally misunderstand about financial literacy. And it's what they misunderstand about wealth magic as well. Because when you're doing wealth magic for short-term results, you really aren't factoring in how much you're giving away, in a sense, to get that short-term result. A long-term approach to wealth magic is going to fundamentally examine your own relationship with money and what you really want. If you don't know what you really want out of your life and where you want to go, and I don't mean just, again, I don't mean how much money you want to make. I mean, like, what do you really want in terms of your own sense of joy? What do you want in terms of experiences? What do you want in terms of other things? If you don't really know any of that, money is never going to work for you. You're always going to work for it. And so, it fundamentally comes right down to understanding and recognizing that the approach to wealth magic involves learning about money and understanding how money works. You may not you and if you don't like money, get over it. Like, get over that, and just like figure out your relationship with it, because hating money is just a useless waste of energy and effort on your part. Money is not going to go away. Even if let's say even if some apocalyptic cataclysm occurred, right? You know what would end up happening? Inevitably, if people lived and survived, they would come up with some new barter system or whatever else, and eventually would evolve into money. It's the way we're wired. It's the way we approach things. And so, people who get all like, oh, money's evil, all that stuff, you know what? They are lying to themselves. They can't live without money. There's just no easy way to do it at this point. And even if they can, even if they're self-sustaining and they grow their own food and do everything else, you still have to look at the fact, what are they doing? They're still putting effort towards some way of managing to live. They are still doing the very same thing that somebody else is doing when they're working at a job in order to make money. So the better approach ultimately is figure out how to make money work for you. Figure out, understand what your relationship with money is and find some way to start making it work for you instead of you working for it. Now, I'm going to also say this in relationship to debt, because a lot of people are going to say, well, Taylor, that's all great and well, but I've got lots of student loan debt and everything else. Well, guess what? So do I. I get it. I have my wife's doctorate that I'm helping to pay off. That's one of the reasons why I'm working at a job right now. Is to help pay off the student loans for that. I have a kid in college who is also acquiring student loans, and so this is just kind of the reality of life, unfortunately. But even there, you have to decide like what is the value of that versus like what's the value of school and what are you going to get out of it. Like in the case of my wife and I, when she decided to get her doctorate, we talked it over and we really looked at it in terms of like what were the long-term advantages of getting a doctorate versus the short-term, relatively short-term disadvantage of student loans. We knew that we were going to get into debt. We accepted it and we started working toward understanding that we were going to have to make some changes in our lifestyle, and some of those changes occurred in ways that we didn't anticipate, but that's life. You can only anticipate so much, and then inevitably you're going to find that sometimes you just have to roll with it. So I get the fact that there's debt, and that debt is a reality for lots of people. I've been there myself. I know what debt is like. It sucks. I don't like being in debt. But again, it comes right down to figuring out how to make money work for you, even in that kind of situation. And there are ways to do that. One of the things that I have, or one of the apps that I have, is something called Change Ed on my phone. And it's set up so that even my everyday purchases are rounding up, and we're taking the rounding of those purchases and putting that toward paying off the student loans. Now, it doesn't necessarily add up to a lot, but even every little cent that's rounded away and put toward paying that off is paying it off that much faster. So this is again one of those examples of how you can make money work for you. You just have to be willing to educate yourself, learn as much as you can about money, and really just change your relationship with it. Whether you're in debt, whether you have tons of money or not, if you do not understand how money works, then money is not going to stay with you. There's a reason why people who've won the lottery in general typically lose money, and the reason why is because they don't understand how to handle money. And again, an example I'll share here is that last year, literally a year ago, my dad died, and when he died, I ended up discovering I ended up discovering that I was going to inherit some money. And I'll admit, for I was glad that I didn't get that money for about 6 months, because it forced me to really have to think about it. Like, how was I going to handle this money? Because all of a sudden I was going to have more money than I had had before. And I had to think about it. I had to wrap my head around it. And this is what people don't do. They don't take the time to wrap their head around money. Like, let's say you get a raise at work, okay? Let's say you get like a dollar or $2 raise at work. If you don't take the time to wrap your head around what that means and what you can do with that dollar or $2, what are you going to end up doing? You're going to spend it, because you're not going to fundamentally think it out. A dollar or $2 raise at work doesn't seem like a lot of money when you think about it, but it is. It's a dollar or $2 more than what you were making before each hour. So if you can take some of that and put it aside somewhere, or do something, for savings, or invest it, or whatever you're going to do, you can make that money work for you. If, on the other hand, you just go and spend it, do you really even understand what you have? Not really. I can guarantee it. So this is really what we fundamentally have to examine, and this is why people who turn to money magic more often than not do not solve their financial problems, because they have not wrapped their head around what it really means to work with money and how they can use it to change their lives. They haven't thought about what they really want in the long term and not just in the short term. And what they've really done is they've set themselves into a perpetual trap where they make money and it goes right back out. They make money and it goes back out because they don't understand what to do with that money. So, you know, if you want to work, if you want to do practical magic for wealth magic, first get clear on what you really want out of your life. What do you want for the long term, the midterm, the short term of your life? What are you willing to do for it? And then think it out. Like, how can I use money to help me get these things? Like if you want to have more experiences in your life, then how can you use money to help you get those experiences? And what experiences do you want to have? Like what's important to you? If you want better health, then what can you do to use money to get that health? Same thing for anything else. You really want to think this out and figure it out. Sit down with pen and paper, write it out, map it out. The point being that before you do any wealth magic, figure out what you actually want to do with it before you do that wealth magic. Because if you don't understand what you want to do with it, you're not going to you're not going to be able to do anything with it at all. And this is what I see happen time and time again for people who not just magical people, but mundane people. I mean, just people in general who don't understand how money works. They waste it, they fritter it away, and this is why they are doomed to continue to make the same mistakes, because they have not really thought out what they want with their lives. Unless you say, well, Taylor, that's great, but my life isn't turning out the way that I want it to, so why should I even bother doing this, etc. I'm going to say, well, then did you really want what it is that you think you want? You have to get clear on what you really want. If you really want it, you will find a way to work toward it. If you don't, you won't. It's as simple as that. And I know that sounds overly simplistic, but it's simply the truth. And I say this as somebody who has managed to turn things around quite significantly from a couple years ago, even when, just everything kind of fell apart in my life. I spent a good 6 months trying to figure out what I really wanted to do with my life as a result of that. And you'll have that. I mean, you could be at the top of your games, really successful, and then suddenly things happen and you're kind of forced to start all over again. I mean, it happens. It happens to everybody. There's not one person it does not happen to. But if you can get clear on what you really want and then start working toward it, then you'll recover, because it's just an inevitability. You'll find ways to work toward it each and every day. But if you don't take the time to figure out what you really want, then you'll work toward what you're experiencing now, which may not be a very satisfying life. We either go up or we go down. We don't. That's just the truth of it. So, if you don't like the direction your life is going in, then figure out what you really want and start learning, about these fundamental skills that you need to learn. And it's not just learning about money, it's learning about other things as well. Your health and like what's really important to you, all that good stuff. Your attitude and your beliefs, and then change it. All right, that's it for this time. Next week, I'm actually going to continue this topic, though. I'm going to do another video, and I'm going to talk a bit about like some of the best practices that I have around money and what I do and how I integrate wealth magic into that. Hopefully, you guys have enjoyed this long ass lecture. I know that's just what you want, to be lectured at by Taylor, but there you go. Thanks and take care.